So what's your sense overall in terms of the roadblocks? Is the sort of the resistance that you hear when you talk to companies, to researchers and others, is it the challenge of the science, understanding of the disease? Is it the market, the sense of the other players, or the kind of financial returns that are out there? What could be accelerated? What hasn't sped up as much as it ought to?
I think that most companies see that Parkinson's could be a blockbuster market. If someone who develops a disease-modifying therapy can have a $2-3 billion drug. So there's a lot of potential there. And I think there's an increased appreciation within companies for other types of therapeutic areas where they can make money related to Parkinson's, which is currently untreated symptoms, or treating side effects of current drugs. And so when you look across those possibilities, they're varied, and they all could be very lucrative. So I do think our main challenges are still about the science. We see more and more programs moving closer to the clinic, so we see both challenges in terms of moving preclinical ideas, but also just purely getting things to the stage of clinical research. We see a lot of challenges within the clinical research enterprise. So even though we spend quite a bit of dollars advancing particular therapeutic programs, we also make significant investments in research tools. And for instance, biomarkers would be a significant area where we have spent nearly $30 million in discovery research since pretty much our beginning, and now we're launching a $40 million verification study just to see if we can validate markers of progression so that we can provide tools. And those kinds of tools can make a big difference at the margin for a company who's deciding whether they should be in PD and whether they think this is a place where they can take something to the clinic in a cost-effective and speedy way.
So if you're kind of analyzing your approach, let's say compare it, first of all, to the early stage preclinical, the science and research, any thoughts about kind of how you operate in a way that might be different from, for example, the NIH in doing that initial work in the labs and with academics?
Well, we certainly have a higher risk profile, and we're also disease specific. So those are two important ways in which we can behave differently. And I'd say maybe a third is that we can be very nimble. So we look, NIH can throw more money at Parkinson's by accident than we can on purpose. So we really want to think about how to leverage the investments that the National Institutes of Health will make in PD. But we find that we can really do a lot of the spade work either by taking higher risks in the very early stage basic science, or picking up the kind of research questions that NIH isn't inclined to fund. And so once we move beyond the hypothesis-driven science, we can really do a lot of that applied work.
So you're saying you're taking greater risks, in a sense, than the NIH with its sort of peer review approach might do.
And our approach is peer-reviewed as well, but we tend to look at return on investment very differently than the government would in terms of an overall basic discovery engine. The return on investment there very different for taxpayers. And of course, the way we look at return is very different than how a pharmaceutical company would look at return, where they're focused on return to equity shareholders. We're really looking at return in terms of accelerating treatments and de-risking the field.
Mm-hmm. So then, having compared a bit with NIH, compare a little bit with the later stage, the clinical development and so on. If you look at, from your understanding now of how the pharma industry works, how different would you say your approach is in scrutinizing what to pursue and how to go about pursuing it?
Well, ideally what we would like to do is position ourselves between the two. So the other two funders are certainly larger pools of capital. This year we'll spend about $50 million in new research commitments, and so that's not trivial, but by comparison the NIH will spend probably about $150 million in Parkinson's, and industry we estimate is spending about $650 million. So we're the smallest relative player, but because we tend to focus in that translational gap, our dollars feel very leveraged, and because we can move quickly, and again, we have a longer view in terms of success and payoff, we can really we can do those preclinical investments to de-risk something so that it makes it an easier trade-off for the pharmaceutical companies.
Tell us a little bit about some of the successes and the breakthroughs where you think you have had a role in accelerating or identifying advances that could be useful.
Well, of course, given how much money it takes to develop a drug and how much time, we've only been at our work for about 10 years, and we have spent about roughly $225 million in funding research over that time period. So we're still in our early days, perhaps. But I think we are seeing, and we look for evidence of how we're making a difference across a variety of metrics. And one way would be if we see that we have funded a program in a preclinical stage, for instance, where that program then gets purchased by a pharmaceutical company, and we've seen successes on that front. Or when we know that our funding comes into a small biotech, for instance, and they're able to, based on our imprimatur, get additional venture dollars. So that's some of the ways we look at it. Separately, though, we can look across a whole field and see where we've been kind of a driving funder, and you can just see the whole field moving. So an area like dyskinesias, which is a side effect of a symptomatic treatment for Parkinson's, if we could treat dyskinesias, patients would just really have a much broader therapeutic window from their current drug regimens. And in the 8 or 9 years that we've been funding work in dyskinesia, we've watched, we funded everything from developing animal models to specific programs. Now we see 8 programs in clinical trials, and our fingerprints are on all of them. And today, where you see a variety of programs already in the clinic, our money may not be needed to necessarily fund a trial, but we can still do things that could be useful for all those companies that are sponsoring trials. For instance, in dyskinesia right now, we're working to validate dyskinesia clinical scales. So this would provide better endpoints for and inform the best kind of clinical trial design for phase 3 trials in dyskinesia. So, basically we run a big portfolio of grants. We have a high tolerance for failure, but we stand ready and kind of armed to move those hits along as fast as we can. And I think in general we're trying to see where we can just, for any given target or any given tool, see what is the next smartest thing that can be done and can we do it.
And in terms of the failure rate, instead, I don't know if you've looked at it in this way. Could you talk about a kind of higher hit rate or lower hit rate than the standard industry benchmarks, do you think, in terms of speed of progression and number of candidates?
I don't think we're in a position to evaluate that, but because I don't think we've seen enough things move far enough along. I know in CNS it's maybe a 1 in 12 expectation of something that goes to phase 1 to get approval. So we don't even have enough things in trials in dyskinesias to really even see if we can beat that bogey. But hopefully we still have a winner within that portfolio. When we think about risk, for instance, we have one small program that we run each year called Rapid Response, and this is actually a program where scientists can email us a 2-page application. Within 3 weeks, they're going to find out whether they've gotten a $75,000 grant, and that check's going to come within a couple of weeks after that. So that's a really fast turnaround, and that program, we spend about $3 to $4 million a year, or we allocate up to that amount for that kind of program. It's an evergreen program. The whole design of that program is to capture the moment where someone reads something in the literature or walks out of a meeting and has an idea and wants to act on it. And so they can come to us with very little preliminary data, just a good scientific rationale, and they can get a grant. So when we first started this program, we wanted to figure out, are we taking enough risk? And if we could see that those are all 1-year grants, and we could start to see what kind of hit ratios or what kind of successes, and we actually thought that, not that we don't want to see the successes, but we really probably weren't taking enough risk if half of the things that we funded were worthy of a follow-up grant. So because we really felt like then we started to look more like the dollars that someone could get from NIH. So we really took that up a notch and said, nope, let's make sure that we are willing to take even greater flyers to make sure that we're providing capital in a very high-risk area that otherwise would be really hard to get dollars.